Hi everyone, thanks very much for dropping into the Emergency Home Learning and More Summit. My name is Belinda Cameron. I'm a teacher librarian in Australia at Maclean High School, which is positioned on the east coast of Australia. And the topic of the talk today is learning locally and connecting globally. So I'm sitting here right now with my puppies. So if you hear any strange noises or sniffles, etc., it's not me. It's either Roxy or Max. So the first image I've got today, inspiring through community connections. I felt that was a really appropriate starting point for this presentation because when I look at the faces of those people, people that I know, people that I feel connected to, I feel in this moment that they're all connected to, the library as a space for community. And that's incredibly important work, and more so now than ever, in terms of what's occurring globally with COVID. So the driving question, what do you know about learning that could dramatically help or change the lives of students, parents, teachers, librarians, or others at this moment? I think the first thing just to share very quickly is an impression or a snapshot of our library community at Maclean High School. So there are a few key areas that we work towards, and that's the concept of inspiring students through story, inspiring creativity, inspiring through inquiry, and whether that's from generic inquiry skills through to transformative, and lastly, they're inspiring through community connections. So teacher librarians as a profession, I think we are mad. We are hoping always to make a difference. And one of the key ways to do that is through collaborations with passionate teachers. And the series of images that are here just give hopefully some indication of the sorts of work that we're involved in at Maclean High School. So the Marilyn Monroe chicken there is an example of a project-based learning opportunity which resulted in a community event where local community retirement village attendees were able to come and listen to students playing music, be served tea and coffee, and watch a whole range of chickens in a whole range of themed costumes strut their stuff down the catwalk while listening to connected music and speeches, etc. So we've got 341 origami cranes there being made down the bottom due to local community connections, and that ended up resulting in just over 2,500 by the time that project was finished. Collaborative group artworks, and in the top right-hand corner, it's a little bit of a snapshot of a local community event that is coordinated between myself and Regan Howarth, one of our learning support officers at Maclean High School, where we plan a Harry Potter themed games night. And that's an annual event and something that's really looked forward to by entire members of our school community. We sell tickets, etc., and it's always a sold out night, but it's just one of those really wonderful things, one of those really wonderful opportunities that school libraries can embrace. Unfortunately, following COVID and the removal of community contact, it has been a very difficult time for teacher librarians all around the world. So before we move on very quickly, just a brief encounter of my story as an educator, because I think it's important to acknowledge your own learning experiences as an educator and how that connects with what you bring to the modern day classroom. So I'm a personal product of the one-room schoolhouse. I grew up in a very small town in the southeast of South Australia. I was one of three students, which sometimes blew out to five in my year level, and I always had composite class experiences through primary school. So I was able to complete my work, look at the work that may have been delivered to the next class group above, and I was mentored by students who were older than me. I had to lead my own learning, and I also then in turn mentored people that were younger than myself in the classroom. So I also moved across a number of different states in my primary school years, and I've taught across two different states as well in Australia. So I am quite adaptive to change. I see learning as a courageous act, having completed a Master of Education a couple of years ago. And I also believe that it's my character strength. I connected with the idea of Tyson Yunkaporta's book, Sand Talk, where he talks about your culture is not what your hands touch or make, but it's what moves your hands. And that was incredibly important for me to think about because as someone who is, a maker, someone who has vital connections with communities, someone who loves storytelling, that concept of how do you constantly look around you all the time for new ways, new resources to learn new things, which was stated by John Seely Brown in his presentation, The Global One Room Schoolhouse. That really connected and drove my thinking as an educator. When you couple that with the Connected Learning Alliance and theories around that concept of libraries as being a third space in between classroom curriculum and the learning that students undertake outside of the school environment, whether it's through community organisations or, extended learning through relationships or extracurricular activities, it's a pretty exciting time to be operating out of school libraries, particularly libraries that are future focused. And wardrobes. I am still knocking on the back of the occasional vintage wardrobe, hoping that it leads me through to Narnia. So that's just a little bit of my story as an educator. So what do we need to know about learning in order to learn local and connect at a global level? So storytelling is a vehicle for youth engagement via wonder. And I've sort of witnessed firsthand how much power there is in youth voice and youth agency when you actually sit with a student, for example, in front of a podcasting platform and you say, well, what story would you like to tell? And in that moment, there's so much excitement, from them in terms of, well, what is it about my experience that I can share with the world? And the fact that adults around them want to listen to that and want to hear their stories. 21st century teacher librarians are a globally connected profession. So the importance of having globally connected professional learning networks and nodes within that, that's something that I really drew from the work of Dr. Mandy Lupton and also Dr. Kay Adoni in terms of how important and precious a quality professional learning network can be. And it's really exciting to be an educator in a time where I can put in a question into a future-focused teacher librarian group and have, at 8 o'clock in the morning and have 300 comments returned by the end of the day. And it might just be a simple question in terms of, I'm trying to do this with a green screen. What am I doing wrong? And so that's so important and such a wonderful thing. And it's certainly something that we need to rely on in terms of making digital artifacts and then, sending them around the world for public consumption. 21st century tools, as I was saying before, the podcasting platforms, etc., creating projects that capture community stories for entry into global networks. So it's really important, of course, to be connected to community, to have connections that you can rely on as far as sources of, planning student learning, student engagement based projects and activities. And of course, there's the power of storytelling, connections and community, and, the power to transform through ideations of self and what your life purpose may be. And students love learning via narrative at any age. So practical examples of these is, for example, when I worked with a group of students in a homework club focusing on creating videos about origami and learning intentions and metacognition that's connected to different steps as we make origami, because origami is one of those things where if you introduce it at the start of a lesson with a new class, you can really listen in to what are the ideations of self as learner that certain kids carry with themselves. So often, the first time they experience a setback, you'll hear them saying not very nice things about themselves or, giving up quite quickly. And so it allows us to tap into some of the, the narratives that we have inside of us that may actually not be true. So that idea of a kid saying to themselves, well, I'm not good at this and I'm not good at anything, offers a vital point of intervention for me to step in and reassure that particular person that that part of a step is an incredibly challenging part, and that it's okay to be able to take a moment, take a breath, ask for help, and then move forward. I think asking kids too, in terms of that concept of life purpose, what are you here for? What's your impact on the world going to be? What's your passion? How can you use your passion to benefit the community and the people that you live in? And, if your passion is design and you're asked to then design a costume for a chicken so that elderly people in your community can come in and watch this event and have a laugh, and it improves their well-being, then that's learning with purpose, and that's important work. And I think students do love learning via narrative at any age, that delight of young children cuddling up with a book, but also teenagers who want to hear, sir, tell us the story about when you went here or there, or what was it like in the Navy, and that's kids are really just, reaching out to have a connection that narrative and storytelling can really create. Tyson Yunkaporta, his book Sand Talk is an incredible read, and I really strongly suggest, if you have a chance to read this text, please do. He references a whole range of different mindsets or minds, and one of them is story mind, and that really resonated with me because he wrote about the role and the power of narrative in memory and knowledge transmission. And so there were links there for me because at the time I was sort of researching cultural approaches to inquiry learning. I was thinking about the purpose and the role of narrative, and also in terms of metacognition, when we're storytelling, where do we go in our thinking in that storytelling? How can we connect that to information search processes and research processes to benefit not only the learning, but also the person who's telling the story. And so there's a really great quote there that the only sustainable way to store data long term is within relationships, deep connections between generations of people in custodial relationship to a sentient landscape. And so that just reading that sent me off. It was a bit of an epiphanous moment, and it sent me off onto another trajectory, and I guess a question, a wondering as to that we live in a global world, and yet there are so many opportunities for these local stories that are connected to local landscapes that school children have the capacity to be able to tell. And it also, I guess, when I was staring at the archives section in the back storage area of our office space in the library, looking at photos and, video cassettes and tape cassettes of stories that have been recorded previously, and how technology has evolved to a point where they're now almost obsolete. And I just felt incredibly sad for the stories that had been captured by people, recorded onto those, particular media platforms, and, are very much at risk of being lost. And so I guess I completely, in that moment, really understood the importance of storytelling and embedding stories within people, and, sharing stories with each other. So in order to collaborate and to connect from local to global networking relies on a commitment to a local and global professional learning network. So these are the people in, future-focused teacher librarian groups, or, it may be connected to the Learning Revolution, or just different organisations where a dose of connectivism and a love for all things social. So by that, what I mean is, when we introduce these projects, it's really important to think, how will we connect these within professional learning networks as opportunities for other educators or other students who might be positioned all over the world to be able to offer feedback. And so it's that aspect of social learning, the tweet, the hashtag, focusing on connections and taking learning into a more social and global activity. And then, of course, creating digital artifacts. So digital artifacts in terms of podcast recordings, films, um, music, just a whole range of different artifacts that can then be released. I'm a lover of links. So when I discover new platforms, for example, such as Loom, and that narrative or that story can travel via a link, then of course it makes it very network friendly. And so there's a great opportunity to see these stories that we create as little separate nodes in the many networks that are out there, that can be released to a worldwide audience. And of course, stories as place-based sources of information. And so that in doing that, we interconnect learning processes with content such as syllabus content, and concepts as well. So libraries are storytelling repositories. We've always been surrounded, as teacher librarians, you're surrounded by stories. And I think that there's sort of that general understanding or that standard understanding of a connection between narratives and storytelling, in terms of passively reading stories. But I think what we can sort of evolve to, or what we're currently evolving to, is how do we actively actually create stories and support young people to lead in the storytelling, not only to share their voice, but also to create opportunities for student agency. So the tool plus the curriculum plus the story plus a community connection. So tools, Padlet, QR codes, green screens, podcasting, Loom, the Noun Project, to be able to find, icons and free use objects are really important as well. Teaching students about website creation and digital portfolios. So library spaces can be designed for student storytelling. At Maclean High School, we look at podcasting, and we're evolving into a few other things in terms of green screen, filmmaking, media production. And I think part of that is that your professional learning network, once you start to research, well, how on earth do I, even operate some of these platforms? Your professional learning network is certainly there to support you as a globally connected educator. So I think it's about being, curious, taking to Twitter or to TweetDeck and starting to search some hashtags that sort of really connect with the work that you're wanting to do. And of course, then, that's when your people arrive and you find your village, and it's a very exciting time. So the goal really is for curriculum that's embedded in community connections and then interpreted or reinterpreted with technological tools. So what are the stories of your community and how can you capture them? And so some of those resources that I was talking about earlier in our archives, which may be outdated or at risk of being lost, are currently being recaptured by students who are finding, stories and sharing them, or finding stories and reimagining them into digital films, etc. So in a time of globally hyper-connected digital landscapes, stories connected back to local communities. What's the purpose? What's the impact of that? And I think they remind us of our global commonalities more so than our differences, which is really important, particularly at this time. I think that they connect communities with passion-based learning. They engage students in the wonder of learning and give us opportunities to drive engagement through inquiry. They also support the development of transliteracies and technologies that are vital for 21st century citizenship and to participate in the world as 21st century citizens. And quite often they also give rise to previously silenced voices. And I think that's always an important question to ask. Who's not in the room? Whose story hasn't been told? How can we revisit this moment from the past and ask a few questions just to see whether or not every aspect of that community story has been captured? And these are opportunities that online learning presents as well, as we look at different tools that are out there that we can still use to still connect with our communities, even though they may not at the moment be allowed to come on site within our schools. We can still create learning projects that we then send out into the community for meaningful feedback and for connection. So let's have a look at a few examples. So the first one is the Maclean High School Anzac Day Digital Museum. And this was a collaborative project between myself and Angela Dennett, a very passionate and engaging teacher from Maclean High School. As an ex servicewoman as well as a teacher, she felt it was very important to connect with our school community over Anzac Day. And in Australia, how that usually looks is we have commemorative parades, etc., where community members come and watch, and we have students who march and represent their school and represent family members who may have served. So we used Padlet, which is a really engaging, interesting, and constantly evolving collaborative tool to pop out via our school social media pages a blank page with a couple of images that we'd added to it, and offered people to click on the box to open the image or website or writing that you wish to view. You can scroll down. You can add information. They could either email us their contribution, they could post them to the Facebook comments of the page. And so what happened was, collaboratively over a number of days, people started to add information. So we got everything from, a recording of the last post through to an ex-student of Maclean High School, Ashley Shannon, sharing her experience not only of being connected to Maclean High School as a student, but also her experiences within the Australian Army. So each of these opportunities really allowed a back and forth between Year 9 history and curriculum in regard to Anzac Day and the experiences of war, the impact on family members who were still able to share images of family members and give information as far as age, etc., and battalion. And also it allowed us to still connect with what we would have usually done for Anzac Day at Maclean High School and what the ceremony usually would have looked like. So I think it's incredibly important, because what this then allowed to do, the feedback we got from this was that people were prepared to share and post images, sharing photos of their front lawns, for example, on Anzac Day, where we were asked to light up the door, and some people shared images of signs that they posted on their front gates. So this in itself is now really lovely, because what it does is it's captured connected communities in regard to experiences of war, and this stands now as a resource that could be used further on down the track. Okay, so another example is Golmerad Goes Global, and this is a collaborative project with Golmerad Public School, which is a local primary school not too far away from Maclean High School, and they're a classroom teacher and assistant principal, Rachel Armour. So Golmerad already had in place this beautiful inquiry learning project where the teachers, under the cover of darkness, had dropped a meteorite in the schoolyard for students to arrive and discover. So they have the newspaper story connected to that. And what occurred over a number of days as part of Education Week celebrations was that the whole of Golmerad Primary School became obsessed with an inquiry about, well, what is this meteorite, and is it a hoax, or was it really left there? And then they started to write stories and presented their articles and poetry and persuasive writing. And so from there was already Rachel was sort of having a chat about how much community talk and excitement there was, and about whether or not it was real. And so we sort of got together, and I said to her, wouldn't it be interesting if we could actually see if we could make this story, just like a meteorite, travel around the world? And so we took the article, created this website, loaded it all on, and then I released it into our professional learning networks. And lo and behold, within almost instantly, comments started coming in from all over the world, offering feedback, offering curious thoughts, offering photographs of meteorites that had landed in other parts of the world. And so to revisit this class and share with them, look, this is what's come in today. These are the countries that this information has come from. And so it really, from an inquiry, went from sort of that, generic right through to a very transformative project, because Rachel and I as educators really didn't have any idea as to where it was going to end up. And we were very much feeling that we were learning in a global one-room schoolhouse. And so we had these lovely peer-supported learning connections that were being made between students as connected learners and between myself and Rachel as teachers as well. So a brief look at some of these comments coming in from Melbourne, Australia. Looks forward to updates on the fabulous science you're experiencing and is very jealous. Hello from Hawaii, Alabama, from the Netherlands, Switzerland, etc. So the next step then became when I sort of caught up with Rachel and said, wow, look at all of this. And she said, fantastic, let's take it to the next level. And so that then began the next process, which was getting the kids together and letting them ask questions of wonder. Who are these people? Where are they from? Are there bears in that particular town? What is Loveland? What's the history of Loveland? Has anyone given us any comments that we could fact check and see if there's any further information on the web? So again, very interesting, very exciting, feeling very connected. The kids loved the feedback. It really validated the work that they were doing. It made them feel incredibly important, and that certainly that they were in that moment very much globally connected. So some of the things that the kids were curious about: Bigfoot, Sugarland, Horseheads, Hurricane Dorian, the Little League series, and the town of Middlesbrough because it was built in a crater from a meteorite. We've had offers of educators wanting to send us books, and then we thought, well, we could track the sending of that book to see how long postage takes. And, then it became, well, are there bears that live in that particular part of the world? So this is one of the favourite projects that I've worked on at this point in time, because the lessons that came out of this is that, connecting with your community in order to learn is powerful, and that your learning community can be local in terms of your local newspaper, etc., but also that it can be global. And, I think also this project was catalytic in that it inspired critical thinking and creativity, and it was authentic and meaningful. And so, this project is just one of my all-time favourites, and I'm still gobsmacked at how much support and interest and feedback it generated from so many different places in the world. The last project, which I'll invite you to have a look at when you have time and if possibly interest, is a project called the Origami Kings. And the Origami King term itself was actually coined by a young student who was in Year 6 at the time. And I'd been working with a homework club, and one of the students had taught me how to make a stingray out of origami, and which I didn't know. So that then grew into, well, let's make origami together, but now let's film each other making origami. Let's now give ourselves a name. Let's actually have a website. Let's start doing some projects at some art exhibitions, and let's start getting ourselves out there and sharing with the world. And similar to the Golmerad Goes Global project, the Origami Kings website also has comments that have come in from different places in the world. So there's a lovely connection with this project for me, because it's connected to narrative, storytelling. It's connected to land animals that are very unique and local to this part of the Clarence Valley in terms of turtles and stingrays. It's connected in terms of metacognitive practices, listening to the kids as they started to use this word, the way. And so our story, Stingray, captures that the learning intentions of trying to work collaboratively and listening to kids in these moments where I'm not speaking, they're the ones that are speaking, and the voices or the term that you hear constantly is "let me show you the way" as they talk to each other. And learn different folds and check that everyone is working together and that nobody's left behind. And so it became this really lovely project, and still is today, in that we have still cranes and turtles and all sorts of things within our library space. And so when children who are at that homework club come in and transition to high school, that they're met with some very familiar shapes that are very much connected to this space and this community and this area. And I think that's so important when we're trying to create library spaces that support student wellbeing. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at some of the projects today in terms of learning locally and connecting globally. I've just collected a little series of images there that on one hand, on the top left-hand corner, we have, the Hyper magazine, but that particular student is sitting on a couch that was purchased for $5 from one of our lovely learning support officers. And, when we have kids that come in and say, can we please do Christmas in July as Year 12 students, these are really wonderful connected opportunities to build communities in our schools. The bottom hand left, just the simple things of pick up sticks. It's fascinating to watch what connects young people. And I think one of the biggest goals for my work as a teacher librarian is to really pay attention to the work and to the not only the work, I guess, but the projects and the learning that students are engaged with and the cultural communities that they build. So if it's, for example, through a love of chess, or if it's through a love of pick up sticks, or if it's through Harry Potter fandom, or if it's because you just love reading Hyper magazine, it doesn't matter what drives the connection, but I think it's so important for teacher librarians to support the connections and to offer opportunities for students to lead. So whether it is a chess club, or whether it is getting together and organising a special event, if we listen to student voice and support that voice, then we create meaningful opportunities for student agency. So school libraries, I think they're the global one-room schoolhouse, supporting collaboration, leadership, wonder, connection and community. During COVID, our biggest challenge is, particularly as teacher librarians, how do we maintain a sense of community? And I think creating digital artefacts that are link-friendly, that can be sent around the world and supported around the world with meaningful feedback is very important as a focus right now to maintain community connections in our schools. And I think learning locally and connecting globally, what it does is it offers transferable skill sets and learning from the experience of the collaboration that occurs between a teacher and a teacher librarian. And I'm so incredibly grateful and very thankful for passionate teachers who approach me to work together. And sometimes we're not exactly sure where projects are going to end, but it's so lovely in such an isolated profession, which teaching often can be, to find people, who wish to collaborate and work together. I think the whole concept of learning locally and connecting globally can flourish within library spaces because they're already our community spaces in our schools. I think they do require, or to work in this way does sometimes require, a shift in mindset. Some of the shifts that I've had to take on board have been connected to frustrations over, trying new technological tools and having to try and use them at a moment's notice, which is often that emergency state that COVID sort of popped us into for a while. So it does require a courageous mindset to think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we can improve on things. I think it also positions students or allows them to become the drivers based on their interest. If you plan a chicken fashion parade, there will be the kids that are passionate about the design of the costumes. There'll be kids that, want to create the musical pieces. There'll be kids that want to write the scripts. There'll be kids that want to film it, kids that want to photograph it, kids that want to help the elderly that arrive and offer them tips on how to use their phones or take better photos. There'll be kids that want to sit with grandparents that have come to watch these chickens strut down the catwalk, and they might then pass on conversations to do with knitting, and then suddenly a knitting group, grows out of that experience as well. So learning locally and connecting globally is also validated by and thrives from community connections. I think all the learning that we do, I could say to a student 5 times over that I think that their work is wonderful, but more often than not, they'll just maybe smile and say, but you would say that, Mrs. Cameron. What we notice is that, there's so much validation that comes from feedback from other places, and so watching, for example, with Golmerad Goes Global, the kids asking when I entered the classroom, how many comments have we got today? And so kids really do love that positive feedback that comes, from the community, whether it's local or global, in response to their work. The development of technology toolkits is necessary, and it's totally okay to have no idea what you are doing. And your professional learning network, for me, has been such a wonderful, positive thing. And I just want to acknowledge organisations such as the Students Need School Libraries in Australia and Future Focus Teacher Librarianship Facebook group and the administrators of those pages, because they create such a vital connection, and also I think constant learning intentions for me as an educator to continue to try and find different ways to do different things. Learning locally and connecting globally, really, to me, I know we're in the thick of it when it sounds like wonder statements. So when you hear that, I wonder, well, are there bears, in Loveland? Or so once we start to hear kids sort of externally wondering about things, to me, that's very exciting and it is a key driver of the work. I think learning locally and connecting globally can be fostered in the explicit teaching of metacognitive practices as well. So it's about acknowledging to young people as learners that there are search processes and research processes, and there are points of intervention where if they're on this learning journey and they're not really sure what to do next, to acknowledge that there are points of intervention where they can lead their own learning but still take their teacher on as a guide on the side, and you'd be checking back in with them. And I think all of these ideas within this presentation about learning locally and connecting globally, it's touching on cornerstones of project-based learning and inquiry learning, and connected learning and constructivist learning. And I think all of these things mean different things to different people. And I think your own experiences, just like mine, I guess it's only been recently that it's actually occurred to me, that epiphanous moment of the connection between the one-room schoolhouse and my primary school experiences, and then this sense of really thinking about the world as this truly connected place when it comes to education and sharing practice across the globe. So I think there are lots of things that allow us to personalise our own standpoint and our own position. And I guess I don't think it's a matter of trying to do everything perfectly, but at the same time, I think it's about going on the journey as a teacher and also as a learner yourself. And I think also the final point is that learning locally and connecting globally, it supports inquiry, and that might begin as generic skills, information search process, Boolean operators, all of those sort of skills that hold up a true search in the wild where things can change and rapidly evolve. And it's okay to sometimes feel like a learning project may be getting a little bit further ahead of you than where you expected to go, because I think that's the wonder for students and for us as educators. So thank you very much. I hope that there's something that you're able to take away from my presentation today. This little slide here is just the last little one that I wanted to share. And I wanted to acknowledge the work of people like the teachers who are positioned here as Professor Sprout, the learning support officers who create these beautiful little baby mandrakes and cart in over days all of these objects, the science faculty that donates, the drama faculty that donates the dragon, and the students themselves that really support the work of what it is to act as a connected school library. And finally, I just wanted to finish off with a redirection to a really great platform, Students Need School Libraries. It's a grassroots platform here in Australia, and it offers all sorts of further information about the work of teacher librarians, the work of school libraries, and how incredibly important these spaces are for students, for connection, and for supporting student wellbeing. Thanks very much, everybody.